What's up, Yang Gang? We are coming to you on my birthday.
Happy birthday!
Happy birthday to me. My big birthday present today, Andrew Yang's climate change speech. Y'all got to check this out. It's pretty intense. And he's also got it, I believe he's got it up on his website now.
He has the whole policy up. So we'll put the link to the policy down below where you can read it all. But this is going to be the entire speech and the Q&A at the end.
No bloopers on this one, y'all. Shout outs to Denzel White for this video footage. You brought it. Honorary Grassroots Yang Gang today, baby.
The way. Thank you, Gang Gang. I love you guys. You're the best. I wouldn't be here without you.
Thank you, press. And I see the Yang Gang is out on a Monday morning on short notice. We appreciate that. I'm Steve Marchand. I used to be the mayor of this city. One of the blessings I've had. What a beautiful day in a beautiful place. And I'm very proud to be an early adopter in the Andrew Yang for President movement. And at this point, it is a movement. One of the important issues that we wanted to lay out as we continue to get traction on every front that you can measure on the campaign is climate change. And you're going to hear today from Andrew tremendous amount of detail in this plan. We're really proud of it. We got a great team that's been working hard on it, and I know it's something that he's been thinking about for a long time. It's beyond just an existential threat. It's an existential reality. It's not something in the future. It's happening now. And I think the plan you're going to hear about today will be releasing. It's a 32 plus page detailed plan. Very excited about it. I think it's going to help drive the conversation in the weeks and months to come on this seminal issue. And it's not just about the environment. It's about the economy. It's about the culture. It's about the structure of our country. It's about defining what the future of the country is going to look like. And I'm really proud because Andrew Yang, in my opinion, doesn't just represent that on this issue. He represents what the future of America can be. At times, we have, in the last few years, been representative of the worst of what we have been. But we got a shot for a president who represents the best of what America can be in the future. And that's part of the reason why, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, a Libertarian, an Independent, somebody that's never voted before, the diversity of Andrew's support is something I have not seen in my 25 plus years in New Hampshire politics. And I think that's an exciting opportunity for our state and our country. So I'm going to leave it at that because we've got here the next president of the United States, somebody I'm proud to call a friend and a supporter. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Yang.
Hello, thank you. Thank you. On a beautiful day like this, it's easy to talk yourself into the fact that climate change may not be bearing down on us and pose an existential threat. But the numbers, unfortunately, tell a very clear story. And some of you were in attendance, some of you saw in the last debate where I staked out the new third position in American politics on climate change. Position number 1, we need to fight climate change on every level. Position 2, climate change is a hoax and not a problem. And then now the new position number 3, it is worse than you think. And unfortunately, that is where the numbers are right now. The UN just released a study last week that said that we're going to be fine if 80% of the world goes vegetarian immediately. Greenland just released data saying that their ice pack is melting at the rate projected in 2070, 50 years from now, today, beyond their worst case scenarios. I was just talking to a scientist here in Portsmouth who says that there are 2,000 residences here just in Portsmouth that are going to be subject to regular flooding. And it's not just here in Portsmouth, it's in Miami, it's in Norfolk, Virginia, it's in coastal communities around the country. They see it here in Portsmouth, they see it that the sea level is rising and that what used to be high tide and an inconvenience now is becoming a crisis for many homeowners, many communities. Climate change has also impacted the fishing communities here, where there's a thriving shrimp industry that has gone to zero here in New Hampshire. And this is just the beginning. Unfortunately, we're just at a point where climate change is going to accelerate. And one of the things that we were talking about, the scientist was describing to me the rate of glacier melt rate, where it's like an ice cube in a cup of warm water, where at first that ice cube does not melt, but then when it does melt, unfortunately the melting just gets faster and faster. So what can we do? I've released a new plan today to help combat climate change that in many ways is similar to the plans released by other Democrats, but it goes further. So first thing we have to do is build towards a more sustainable economy here in the US. And the main way to do that is by internalizing all the externalities from fossil fuels and dirty forms of energy, and then creating an incentive structure that allows America to innovate and install solar panels, put in wind turbines, invest in geothermal, to try and speed up our move towards renewable energy sources. And we can't have any illusions about this. The truth is we subsidize the fossil fuel industry to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars over their development. And now, for whatever reason, those lobbyists are presenting the current situation as if it's carved in stone. We help subsidize those industries, and it's time that we invest in the energy sources of the future. One of the planks in my platform is a carbon fee and dividend, which I think is a very efficient way to help internalize the cost of emissions for producers and also fuel innovation. That American entrepreneurs and companies, if they know that there is money to be made by helping reduce emissions, then that's where the resources will go. Now, when I was on the debate stage, sorry, the noise, it sounded like a whale a little bit, like the boat rubbing together against the pier. The whales like my climate change plan. They've come up to the surface. You might not be able to see it on camera, but there are half a dozen humpback whales all in the back, like clapping their flippers together, saying, "Yang gang." So at the last debate, I commented on the fact that the United States is responsible for about 15% of global emissions, and that is the number. So we, in our discussions, like to pretend it's 100%, that if we were to clean up our acts, that climate change would reverse itself, but it will not. And we all were witness this weekend to the burning of the Amazon rainforest, the lungs of the world, which accounts for about 20% of the world's oxygen. And we looked on in horror and thought, wow, what can be done? What can we do? This is truly a global issue. And even as we upgrade our own infrastructure, we have to try and help the rest of the world advance in the same direction. Now, what's happening in the rest of the world is that China is investing billions, hundreds of billions in renewable energy sources, but they are now exporting dirty energy to Africa and the rest of the developing world. They're going to Africa and they're saying, hey, I've got a power plant for you and it burns coal. How does that sound? And then Africa, the people of Africa are saying that sounds great because they're at an earlier stage in their development. They're just trying to get energy as expensively as possible. So how do you combat that set of incentives? America has to be able to go to these developing countries and say, instead of that coal burning power plant, how about solar energy? How about wind? And we're going to help you get there. We're going to subsidize these forms of energy. We're going to make it cost competitive, because we have to know that other countries right now are just at an earlier stage where they don't care about anything but cost. That's the reality, and that's 85% of the world's emissions. So number one is building a sustainable economy for ourselves here in the US. Number two is trying to export these technologies and build a sustainable world economy, which is going to be a huge challenge, but we have no choice but to lead, or else the 85% will just continue to grow and will not make the progress that we need to make. The third step, if you heard my debate answer, was that we need to move our people to higher ground. Now that's both literal and figurative. But we know that in the case of a natural disaster, we know with climate change, who's going to suffer? It's going to be poor people without as much in the way of resources to make their families and homes and communities more resilient. And Portsmouth is not one of those communities. I was just hearing that Portsmouth has resources that are being put to work, but the city council person here in Portsmouth knows that communities around the country and around the world are going to be struggling with this, and that it's going to be poorer communities, people of color, people who don't have economic resources are going to struggle the most. So when we say move people to higher ground, we need to put our country's resources to work to help people do just that. My flagship proposal, as you all know, is a $1,000 freedom dividend for every American adult, and that's going to help because that's going to put money into people's hands so they can protect themselves. When you see a natural disaster like Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, what happened? People who could got into cars and drove away, and then who was left behind? People who do not have cars to get into, people who just didn't have the economic resources. So by putting money into people's hands, we can help us all become more resilient and responsive to climate change. But we need to subsidize the large-scale redevelopment of many houses and buildings around the country. It's going to cost tens of billions of dollars, but that's where our resources should go. Miami's already spending hundreds of millions trying to elevate their roads and buildings and on water pumps, but most communities are going to struggle with this for years and years to come. Many communities just have the resources to identify the need, but then not meet it. And then if you're a municipality and you invest money on trying to address climate change, you're going to rob Peter to pay Paul. You're going to spend less on vital city services, education, and other things that we need to thrive as a community. So moving people to higher ground means owning the fact that climate change is real, it's advancing, and that the public resources need to be put into place to make us all safer and help our communities adapt. The fourth pillar of the plan is to try and reverse the damage. We are well past the point where we can do less of the bad things and expect things to get better. We're well beyond that point. We have to start proactively healing our environment and helping ecosystems recover. So the most benign forms of that would be planting trees. And that doesn't even need to be necessarily within our own country. We could go to other parts of the world and say, hey, we'd love to plant hundreds of thousands of trees here, and we will pay you for the privilege. And there will be jobs in it for you because this new forest ecosystem is going to require maintenance and care. That's the kind of move we need to invest in. And the costs are trivial if you compare them to the catastrophic effects of doing nothing and allowing the climate to continue to warm. So it's reforestation. In an environment like this, we need to reforest the oceans themselves by putting in microalgae seabeds, and it's called a marine permaculture array. It's an MPA. That acronym always takes me a second. The Atlantic Ocean is losing 4 to 8% of its biomass a year right now. Think about what that means cumulatively over time, what that's going to mean for communities like Portsmouth and other environments that rely upon a thriving ocean for their livelihoods. So we need to reforest the oceans themselves. We need to start planting microalgae seabeds and then repopulating marine ecosystems so that this 4 to 8% lost biomass every year starts to recover. This is what we mean by reversing the damage. We can't just try and cap emissions and recycle. We need to actually try and make the earth proactively better. And I just had a very interesting conversation about this. So there's a very controversial field right now called geoengineering, which is when you try to modify what's happening in our climate in some human-based way. And the reality is that we're entering a frontier time when other countries will be interested in geoengineering because there are a number of island countries that are literally going underneath the water right now. They're like losing their entire habitat or homeland. Now, the countries that are now being submerged do not have massive resources that they could have invested in geoengineering. They were just out of luck. But increasingly, there are going to be other world powers, particularly China, that are going to look up and say, the climate is doing massive damage to our economy, and we're going to start looking at ways to change that. And the Chinese will not be very consultative about it. They'll probably just pull the trigger because they feel that if they make a decision, that they don't need to talk to the rest of the world. So this is the scenario we have to try and prevent over the next couple of decades. I would convene a global geoengineering summit because there are researchers around the world that are looking into this right now, what we can do better. We have to get those scientists all in the same place, share lessons, and make sure that the world is actually coordinated on this, because we do not want to live in a world where 2 decades from now, China just launches sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere in an attempt to reverse global warming. So that's reversing the damage. And then the fifth is a constitutional amendment that says that it is a key part of the United States of America's society and government to preserve and safeguard and protect our environment for future generations. We We have a national heritage around national parks and natural resource that we've been trying to pass on for generations. And how could we be ignoring the biggest element of all that, which is the planet itself? That I'm a parent, I've got 2 kids who are 6 and 4, and I do not want to leave them a shambles of a planet, an epic disaster. And they'll look up and very correctly look up and say, what the heck were you doing? Or what the heck was our generation doing to allow this to happen? We are better than this. We can be better than this. And we should embed this in our Constitution so that through administrations of any political party, we know that this is a key part of what makes us America. So this is the 5-part plan. We summarized it by calling it, it's worse than you think. But we can lower emissions, we can get our people to higher ground, and we have to act very, very quickly. So would love to work with you all on this. Recycle, reuse, I'm kidding. But if anyone has any questions who are not from the media, because there are a bunch of people who decide to spend some time, and I sense that many of them are passionate about climate change. So if you have questions, not plants at all. Really, they're not. I mean, you can check them out. So you can tell, this guy's definitely not a plant. Come on up and ask a question. What do you think? It's the Russians cutting off our sound. They're always trying to hold back my campaign.
I have a question about, what are you gonna do to make sure that, or what, or how, sorry, what, can I give someone else a try?
All right, man, we'll come back to you. Don't sweat it.
Can I go?
Sure, you got the mic.
Yeah. Hi. So I have a question about the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they approve all gas pipelines that go across state lines. And right now there's 2 open slots of the 5-member commission. Seems like something our president would have. And so my question is that the next president's going to have to nominate these 2 positions. So as president, would you have those 2 nominated positions have to approve of a climate test for any new fossil fuel infrastructure?
Good old FERC. Yes, I would. And the big picture for us right now, the trap we're in, is that when we go to the American people and say climate change is an existential threat, it's a massive problem, why is it we're having a hard time convincing Americans to get on board with that? A lot of the reason is that right now 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Almost half can't afford an unexpected $500 bill. So if you go to them and say, we need to make progress on climate change, a lot of them say, I can't think about 10 years from now. I'm worried about today, tomorrow. And if you present climate change measures to them, what they think is it's going to make things more expensive. It's going to cost jobs. So that is the knee-jerk reaction you're getting from a lot of Americans right now. And there are a few things we need to do to make progress on this. Number one, freedom dividend, $1,000 a month, gets the boot off of people's throats and allow them to breathe easier. And then if they can look at their child and say, your future is assured, we're going to be here a while, and you go to them and ask them about climate change, they'll say, yeah, we need to make progress. Like right now, they have their heads down, you got to get their heads up. $1,000 a month will help get our heads up. Number two is we need to evolve from these archaic economic measurements we have, where what the other side is saying right now is they're saying the economy and jobs are number one, GDP all the way, and that if you have these sustainable sources of energy, it's going to make everything more expensive and inconvenient. What we have to do is we have to change the measurements themselves. GDP is something we made up almost 100 years ago. And even the inventor said this is a terrible measurement of national well-being. We should never use it as that. Right now, GDP, if there's a hurricane that wipes out city blocks, it's good for GDP because you have to rebuild those city blocks. Does that make any sense? So think about it. You have this measurement that's convincing people that somehow addressing climate change is going to cost money. What we have to do is we have to realign our economy around our shared progress, which would include, number one, the externalities from fossil fuels and other things. I mean, if you think about the damage that climate change is going to do, trillions of dollars easily. And right now, the fossil fuel industry has had to pay none of that. Right now, there's a set of Dungeness crab fishermen in California that are suing the oil industry because their industry, the Dungeness crab industry, is getting destroyed because of fossil fuels. And if you think about it, you have the fossil fuel companies getting subsidized to hundreds of billions of dollars and then causing trillions of dollars worth of harm. So we have to internalize the cost of all of that harm in the existing industry and then start measuring our economy to include things like our environmental progress. So when you ask about the commissioners, should they be including a climate test? Not only should they, but our entire society should. We should be using economic progress as a benchmark for things that include environmental sustainability, our children's health, which we all know is tied to climate, average income and affordability, mental health and life expectancy. Then if we do those things, then all of a sudden we get out of this tug of war that right now that we're trapped in. So the tug of war is on one side you have like economic growth and jobs, and then on this other side you have addressing climate change. We have to let people know that they're the same thing, that we can grow our economy, we can create hundreds of thousands of new jobs. And I was talking to an entrepreneur who started a company that's created hundreds of jobs in installing solar panels on homes and schools. Those jobs are very, very hard to automate. You all know that I'm very passionate about automation. You know what it would take to make a robot plumber? Think about that for a sec. That's going to be a human plumber for a long time. The solar panel installer on your rooftop is analogous to the plumber. Can you imagine what it would take to make a robot that install that? No. It's going to be a human being who's going to climb up on your roof and going to install solar panels. Hundreds of thousands of resilient jobs for a long time to come. If we do this right and we define our economic progress to include our environmental sustainability, then this becomes the win-win. It creates millions of new jobs, and we can get out of this tug of war. The tug of war in many ways is what I think of as the mindset of scarcity versus the mindset of abundance. The mindset of scarcity is winning right now in this country 60-40 because most Americans can't pay their bills, and you can see it. Studies have shown that if you can't pay your bills, it has the functional impact of reducing your IQ by 13 points or 1 standard deviation. So imagine a population that has its IQ reduced by 1 standard deviation having to worry about a big problem like climate change. It's not working. What we have to do is we have to reverse that mindset of the mindset of scarcity, and replace it with a mindset of relative abundance and optimism and problem solving and future orientation. And then we can align economic progress and what's right for the planet. It's a very long-winded answer to the fact that I'd say yes, the FERC commissioners need to tie climate change in. Sir.
Yeah, we have a very antiquated electric grid system. What are your plans in modernizing that?
So one of the elements of the plan, if you decide to read all 33 pages of it, is the grid modernization race to the top, where we have to create incentives so that utilities are modernized and are able to get the money back if they make the investments. And this is true. Another part of the plan is something of a new Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae for homeowners, so that if you decide to upgrade your home for solar panels, then we make the cost of capital so cheap that you'll get your money back over like a several year time frame. We have to do the same thing for utilities essentially, because right now we're asking utilities to invest tens of billions of dollars to modernize, and then they're like, when am I going to get my money back? So the federal government has to put the incentives in place to say you'll get your money back faster, because we'll make the cost of capital very inexpensive. The opportunity for us on the grid is so massive. The studies are that we spent hundreds of billions of dollars on making our grid smarter, more dynamic, more responsive, smart meters in buildings and homes. It would cost a lot up front, but we'd get the money back over a multi-year period and end up saving hundreds of billions of dollars over time. And that's the kind of opportunity we have to take advantage of. In America, this is like a microcosm of it, the power grid. It's like we invested in this grid, and it was great for its time. It was great to do what it was designed to do, but now we have to try and evolve and advance to the next level. And the corporate incentives right now are absent. And we all know that right now companies are just going to do what they feel is going to maximize the almighty dollar, the bottom line. So the goal with the power grid is to create a structure that enables these utilities to pay for modernization and then get the money back in a much shorter time frame. Grid modernization race to the top. My staff's telling me I've got 2 more questions, and we're definitely going to come back to the young man here because I know he's got one. Oh, sorry.
Hi. question about the military and environment and climate. So the military is one of the largest consumers, basically, of fossil fuel. If there was a study that if it was ranked a country, it would be basically ranked 55th ahead of Denmark, Sweden in terms of impacts on climate change. Yet the military also suffers risks from climate change. Norfolk Naval Base, for example, is anticipated to flood daily in about 20 years. So how are you planning to address, climate change specifically through the military?
I'm going to share a story that I can't confirm, but it made an impact on me. So there's a friend of a friend who's a Top Gun fighter pilot. And he says his least favorite thing time all year is that there's a time at the end of the fiscal year that he goes over the Pacific Ocean and just starts dumping fuel into the ocean. And then we asked, why the heck do you do that? And he said, well, we have to show that we used all the fuel in our budget, because if we don't, then we get less money next year. And I heard that story and I was like, that's the worst story I've ever heard. this person. But it makes sense if you reflect on it for a moment, that is the way a bureaucracy would function. We're spending $750 billion or so every year in our military-industrial complex, and we know that the carbon emissions of that industrial complex are very low on their priority list, that they're not trying to maximize their energy efficiency, that's for sure. So one of my goals is to take some of the $750 billion that's going to the military-industrial complex right now and channel it towards infrastructure and higher resilience. Because if we're going to spend this money, we should be spending it on things that have a higher economic and social and environmental impact over time than our current expenses. We need to protect America from the threats of today. But if you were to make a list of the threats of today, in my opinion, climate change would be number one. And there are a lot of military thinkers who agree with that. They look up and say climate change is global security threat number one. If you look at what's happening around the world, there are migrant crises that are getting kicked off by climate change. They're moving into other countries that are struggling, and then you have this xenophobic anti-immigrant sentiment, populist governments, and a lot of this is being initiated by climate change. And it's going to accelerate. They're going to be increasing droughts and food shortages and the rest of it. So this is a global security challenge, and we need to smarten up. We need to wise up and start investing our resources on fighting the real threats of today. Climate change is number one on that list. And we're gonna end where we started. So fun.
My question was about cars. What are you gonna do to make sure that everybody's cars are energy efficient? Because with a lot of people living paycheck to paycheck, that means a lot of people can't just afford to buy a new electric car. Plus, we don't need everybody driving a Prius.
Wow, so down on Priuses. What's up with that? So that was the other question, right? Well, it's a very smart question, because we're going to have clunkers on the road for years and years to come. That's just a fact of life. But we can make rapid progress. Number one, by updating our infrastructure so that there are charging stations everywhere, so that if you have an electric car, you don't have to worry about mapping out where the appropriate charging stations are. You need one standard, then you need to invest in those charging stations. This also goes back to trying to make people's investments pay off. We're already subsidizing electric vehicles, but we can do much, much more in that dimension. And Americans just listen to their own wallets and pocketbooks. Like, if I buy a car and I know I'm going to save thousands of dollars on fuel costs over the intervening years, then I'll make that bet. That's the set of incentives we have to put in place. My plan has a date of 2030 for all vehicles to be emission-free. So any new vehicle would be emission-free. Also, you probably know that Elon Musk endorsed me just the other day. I don't know if you saw that. So he's got the right idea that he's made electric cars much, much cooler. We have to make them not just cooler, but also cost efficient for more Americans. And then if we are successful enough on it, then we can even start creating subsidies for people to trade in their gas-guzzling clunkers for a more modern vehicle when the fleet is up to that standard. Okay. Thank you so much. See you all very, very soon. Let's make history. We're on the up and up. We're just going to keep on getting stronger, and then we're going to take it all in February, thanks to the great state of New Hampshire. Thank you, New Hampshire. I went to high school here.
Yummy, 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 yummy.